our guy Tim here. So Tim's phenomenal. He's on most of our shows. Obviously, USC fan. What I enjoy here is so we've got various team channels, team shows. So this is Oklahoma, and we're going to talk Oklahoma all the time. And we want Oklahoma fans to come here. But I enjoy the other fan bases, and most notably reasonable SEC fans because Oklahoma's coming to the SEC, reasonable Texas fans because of that rivalry, and because of the dynamic with Lincoln Riley now, reasonable USC fans. So Tim's extremely knowledgeable, but he is definitely pro USC. So he's asking here, has Brent Venables ever explained why he was a coordinator for 22 years and never made the leap to head coach? Are there any concerns at OU about this? Well, he certainly had the opportunities, most notably at Auburn. And I would consider Auburn to be a top 15 job in the country. And Brent Venables, I think it's pretty apparent to see that he was very specific and very, not coming up with the right word, very intentional about the leap to the head coaching position. He just got one of the top 5 to 8 jobs in the country as a head coach. A lot of guys just, it's automatic. I'm a coordinator. I'm going to take, okay, Memphis opened. I'm going because I want to be a head coach and start on that track. But he was very intentional. And I'm not going to put words in the man's mouth, but based on what I've heard and what I heard from him and about him, that had it played out, that he was going to be at Clemson for the rest of his career, maybe that would have been an unfulfilled dream, but he would have been fine being the defensive coordinator, making a ton of money at Clemson, built a beautiful home there, brought his family there, his outside family, and was perfectly comfortable and content to stay there at Clemson. So if he did not get the right job, and this may be the only one in the country, maybe, that he wasn't moving.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, Mark, because you typically don't see this in college football anymore, right? You don't see guys be be an assistant for this amount of time. But I think everything you said is factual from what I've everything that I've heard. He is a guy. I don't know that he was specifically holding out for Oklahoma, but I do know that he was a guy that was looking for a very specific um, type of job. And when I say specific, I believe that he was in the mix for Kansas State, the Kansas State job a couple of times. Um, which something at your alma mater would be hard to pass up. Auburn, as you mentioned, he was there was one there, and I from everything that I've heard, even heard an interview with Thad Turnipseed, is that he was very, very close to taking that job. But at the end, he just didn't feel like it was the greatest fit or place for him. So I think ultimately I think he was content. Should he, if he was going to be the defensive coordinator at Clemson for the rest of his career, and he didn't have a big time job opening, um, like in Oklahoma, like a USC, like in Alabama, like one of those top 5 to 10 jobs, then I think he was going to stay. I mean, he was I believe the highest paid defensive coordinator in the country, or the highest paid assistant in the country. So I think, and I don't know, and I may not be factual on that, but I think he was at least in the within the top 2 or 3. But yeah, no, I think, and it just he very much had an affinity for the University of Oklahoma, obviously with his time from his time here, and it was very difficult for him when he decided to leave to go to Clemson. Obviously, he knew that Bob was bringing Mike back. Um, didn't Ultimately didn't necessarily want to be a co-defensive coordinator, wanted to, kind of have the reins for himself. Changed his mind a couple of times just because he loved this school so much. And so I think, obviously I think he would be hopeful that the Oklahoma job would come up and he would be he would be a candidate and be the right guy. But no, I don't think that there's any concerns from that, just because I mean it's been widely known in the kind of coaching industry that he is a guy that was really just kind of looking for the right fit for him, and what that would be would probably be a top 5, top 10 job.
Tim made this point in the chat. I've made it several times as well, because we tend to look at the recruiting rankings and say, okay, this team's number 1, they're number 5, and we kind of gauge in our mind what's the difference between 1 and 5. Okay, it's about this, and then the difference between 5 and 10 is the same, and the difference between 10 and 15 is the same. To Tim's point, I'm not going to necessarily alarm Oklahoma fans, because the talent rankings are very important, but they're not everything, especially with the transfer portal now. So, and this is a bit of an outlier, so we'll put an asterisk next to this as well, because Texas A&M just brought in the number 1 rated class in the history of college football. But if you take Texas A&M at 1 and Oklahoma at 8, again, we could all have our perspective on what does that mean, 1 versus 8. It sounds like there's a gap, but it's not that big a deal. Well, if you look at the star points, the difference between 1 and 8 is the same as the difference between Oklahoma at 8 and Boston College at 40. And
Yeah.
I'm starting to look, I'm sorry to cut you off. Just one other point there, Jason. I started looking more at that when we had a real deep dive on Ohio State and Michigan. And I laid out the difference between Ohio State at 4 and Michigan at 8 is the same as Michigan at 8 and number 24. Like, it really starts to drop.
Yeah, it does, and I think, Mark, it kind of lends it lends it to that comment that I'd heard a couple. I've heard Brent make this comment a couple of times. I've heard some of the other coaching staff make this comment as well. So the difference between being good and being great is sometimes larger than being average and good, right? And so, I mean, depends on how the way you kind of attack what you had mentioned there, but I think you're right. There's probably a smaller gap between being an average team and a really good team versus being a really good team and a great team. And there's not a whole lot of teams that can say that they're great in terms of a program right now, right? Obviously, Alabama leads the charge in that, but you got a couple of others that you could say are are great, and maybe, I don't know, just depending on your criteria, maybe Alabama's by themselves in being great. But I would put Ohio State in that category. Um, I think Clemson kind of is teetering the line a little bit. Right now, I think Georgia's kind of teetering the line a little bit. I mean, this past year is getting them closer to being great. I think LSU is another program that, obviously, maybe not currently, but was close to kind of teetering on great. But the ability for teams to be consistently great each and every year, it's hard. I mean, it's very hard. There's only a few teams that are that are able to do that, and so when you look at that, that's where Oklahoma wants to be. That's certainly where Oklahoma wants to be and can be. But it just remains to be seen. And I think they've got the right people here. But how long does it take to get there? Because it used to be called the Sooner Monster, which was Barry Switzer coined that phrase years and years ago. Um, and talk about, there's this monster has to be fed, or it gets out of control. Like, as good of a coach as Switzer was, is there were some periods where he was throwing out some 7-5, 8-4, 9-3s that people wanted him gone. And so you're going to you're going to have if you have a little bit of complacency there, people are going to people are going to want to know what's wrong, and people are wanting to have better because Oklahoma's now in the midst of their longest national championship drought, going from 2000 to 2022, 23 here. You know, potentially 23 years or more. So, so yeah, I think that's there, and I think people will for Oklahoma fans this year and just like the disgruntlement that was this past season. I think Oklahoma as a program gets a pass. I think last year based on what was going internally with the coaching staff. Um, as early as midway through the season, but I think people will be if Oklahoma threw out an 8-4 this season, I think people would be understanding, obviously, but you better not put out too many 8-4, 9-3s, and specifically in a row, or the chatter starts to get louder. But um, I think this is a team that's better than 8-4, certainly better than 7-5, but kind of remains to be seen where they'll be.